Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are painting Wisteria and it is day 27 of our 30 days of watercolor flowers, so let's get started. So because in watercolor we want to start with our lightest color so we can layer on top of it, I'm starting with a very light wash of purple. And I'm painting these shapes. I'm kind of going upward with these round shapes and I'm kind of pointing them towards the end, kind of teardrop shape. We want it more full at the top. And then as I'm coming downward, I'm tapering off and I'm starting to angle those teardrop shapes towards the bottom. So toward the middle, everything is getting thinner, starts getting smaller, and those teardrop shapes start pointing downward. So the easiest way to paint shapes like this is when you're painting these bigger strokes, you're going to use more the middle of your brush and not the tip of your brush. So using the middle of my brush, I'm just kind of rounding out, making these feathery strokes. And if you look at a reference picture for Wisteria, they're in these really beautiful drapey bunches that are coming off of a tree branch, right? And so I'm not necessarily painting every single flower because you can see I'm doing like groups and bunches of flowers together within the bunch. And so I'm just keeping it really loose and giving the illusion that there's lots of flowers clustered together. Now before my really light wash dries, I'm going in with a very highly pigmented purple. And the best way to do this to get the right amount of bleeding and blending that you want is to make sure that your brush is pretty dry, that there's not a ton of water on your brush, that it's dry in the fact that it's not totally dry, but it doesn't have a ton of water in the bristles. You want it mostly that purple pigment, and then you drop it right into those wet spots and it will bleed just the right amount that you want it to. So this bunch of flowers is going to be kind of hugging next to that other bunch, right? And so we don't want it to look too the same. So I'm going to make one of them a little taller and one of them a little longer so you can tell the difference between each bunch. But I wanted them to overlap just a little bit on the side because that's really realistic to how I was seeing Wisteria portrayed in the reference pictures. Also, when you are painting the smaller petals, that's more when you're using the tip of your brush. So for this piece, I'm not necessarily doing a bunch of really realistic flowers and shapes because with Wisteria, it's a lot of flowers bunched together, draping down. And so I'm just trying to capture the illusion of those flowers. So you want to leave enough white space between the bunches that you can see that there's separation, that there's individual flowers. It's not just one big mess of a flower, right? And so keeping the white space and keeping those shapes really rounded helps with that illusion. So I'm going to speed through it just a little bit, but I'm just going to keep fiddling with the composition, adding more petals where I feel like it's off, making certain areas longer or different to give dimension or difference to the different bunches. So now I'm adding my branch across the top. I'm using a brown color and I'm really just trying to keep this uneven and loose, use different pressures with my brush so some areas are thin, some areas are thick, and I'm going to mess around with the whole thing, but keeping it light and loose like that with wood will make it look more realistic. The stems on the Wisteria are this bright green color and they come from the branch all the way down through the Wisteria and attach every single petal to this little stem. And so I want to make sure that I tap it onto the branch and also you can see that main stem all the way through each Wisteria. And then I'm going to go through and add a little bit of green connecting the buds to the main stem, but we definitely want a very obvious green center going down the whole bunch. Also at the end, there's going to be more of the green buds where there's not a blossom yet, so we can go farther down than we've painted the purple petals and continue to add more of these green little blossoms at the bottom. Also, while I have the green, I'm definitely going to mess around with adding the leaves around the top of each of the Wisteria. Most of the leaves are focused along the branch up at the top, but I'm also going to have some of the leaves draping down next to the Wisteria bunches. So when I'm creating this greenery between the blossoms, I'm really just using very, very light pressure with the tip of my brush, making really quick strokes. So they're not really planned out or super perfect. The quick strokes make it look more organic, make it look more realistic. So I'm just really just trying to snap them in there between the blossoms. And for the leaves, I'm really trying to do the same thing. I'm not trying to always create these perfect leaves. I want them to look like they're going in all different directions. So some of them are just going to be little side swipes with my brush. Some of them are going to be more full looking leaves, but I want them to be, more angled or have interesting tips, because if you look at a reference picture for a wisteria, they are just kind of wispy little leaves up there at the top by the branch. So once again, I'm going to speed through it just a bit because it does get a little bit repetitive, but I am doing the same type of technique. And like I've said in my previous videos before, whenever you are unsure about making a stroke, make a small stroke. Make a stroke that's thin with the tip of your brush, because you can always go back and add more of a thicker stroke later. And so that will give you the confidence. And usually the thin stroke is the winner. Usually I'm very happy when I've made a thin stroke because I like the way it looks. It's thin, it's organic, it's usually a little wonky, right? But I can always go back and say, oh, that needs to be a little bit thicker. And then I'm even more happy with it because I didn't start with a thick stroke that was maybe too thick, and then I can't do anything about it to fix it. So now that I've got all these leaves along the branch and I've got these leaves draping down along the wisteria, I'm taking a dark brown to add more detail to this branch, because a light branch with no, distinctive details does not look right. So I'm just going through and adding it a little bit here and there, making sure to keep some of the light areas for highlight. And now I'm going in with a really dark bluish green and adding more leaf details. So when you're doing greenery, one of the best ways to add dimension and help everything pop out is after you've gone through and painted your light, really pale washes of green, is you can go through and take darker colors of green and do smaller leaves or overlapping leaves, or do something like what I call companion leaves, where you do a leaf right next to it. And so having them sit next to each other just really helps your whole painting pop. Now I'm going through with a slightly darker purple wash. It's still pretty light and has a lot of water to it, but it's slightly darker than our original purple wash, and I'm just kind of tapping it onto the blossoms. And again, this is adding dimension, it's adding texture, it's helping the entire painting not look super flat. So our goal is to just really make everything look more three-dimensional and textured and interesting. I am also adding an even darker tone of the dark purple for more contrast. And now that we have practiced our wisteria, I am adding it to my watercolor flower guide, and I just really love the texture and the depth and the color of this one. I think it also adds another fun element to bouquets and compositions where the flowers are draping down. Thank you so much for being here today while we painted wisteria on day 27 of our watercolor flower guide. This one was such a fun one to paint, and I will see you tomorrow for day 28. Bye.